The arrow leaves the bow at 130 kilometers per hour. The tip carries a black poison extracted from a plant called desert rose. In less than 20 minutes, the 70-kilogram antelope will be immobile. The Hadzabe have no supermarkets, no farms, no herds. Everything they eat must be found, hunted, or pulled from the earth on that same day. And yet, scientists from Stanford University discovered that the gut microbiome of this people is the most diverse ever recorded in human beings. Why does one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa insist on living this way? To answer this question, you first need to understand how they live. And that begins before dawn in the rocky hills surrounding Lake Eyasi in northern Tanzania. 1,300 people. That is the total number of Hadzabe remaining on the planet. Of these, only 200 still live exclusively from hunting and gathering, without any dependence on purchased or cultivated food. They are the last guardians of a way of life that defined humanity for 95% of its existence. The Hadzabe territory is 50 kilometers from Olduvai Gorge, where paleontologists unearthed fossils of Homo habilis dating back 1,900,000 years. Scientists call this region the cradle of humanity. For the Hadzabe, it is simply home. Their oral history contains no narrative of migration. They did not come from somewhere else. They have always been there. The Hadzabe morning begins with fire. There are no matches. There are no lighters. A man takes 2 dry sticks, fits the tip of one into the groove of the other, and begins to spin it between his palms. The friction generates heat. The heat generates an ember. The ember finds a nest of dry grass. In less than 30 seconds, the flame appears. 30 seconds. This time is not an exaggeration or a performance for tourists. Researchers who lived with the Hadzabe repeatedly documented this impressive speed. For context, most people in industrialized societies would take several minutes trying to light a fire by friction if they succeed at all. The Hadzabe do it like you flip a light switch. The difference lies in 40,000 years of accumulated practice, passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, without interruption. The fire serves to warm them during the cold nights of the savannah, where temperatures can drop below 10 degrees. It serves to cook tubers and meat. It serves to ward off nocturnal predators. It serves to produce the smoke torches that allow for the collection of honey. And it serves, perhaps most importantly, as a meeting point. At night, families gather around the flames to share stories, resolve conflicts, and pass on knowledge that no book can capture. But before any meal around the fire, someone needs to bring the food. And it is here that the true survival engineering of the Hadzabe reveals itself. The men wake up with the sunrise and take their bows. Each adult Hadzabe possesses his own, manufactured by himself from local woods. The preferred one is mutateko, known scientifically as Dombeya kirki, a tree that grows on riverbanks and offers the perfect combination of flexibility and resistance. When mutateko is not available, they use tizapaleko or kongoroko, species abundant in the Yaeda Valley region. The process of manufacturing a Hadzabe bow takes about 2 hours. The archer selects a branch with the appropriate curvature, removes the bark, carves the tips, and adjusts the wingspan until it corresponds exactly to the extension of his open arms. Each bow is personalized for its owner. The draw weight frequently exceeds 100 pounds, more than double the recreational bows used in the West. To pull the string to the ear and aim with precision, the Hadzabe hunter develops a specific musculature that begins to be trained at 3 years of age. 3 years. Hadzabe boys receive their first miniature bows almost as soon as they learn to walk. They practice by aiming at lizards, small birds, and insects around the camp. At 8 years old, they already accompany adults on short hunts. At 12, they manufacture their own weapons. At 15, they are complete hunters, capable of tracking, pursuing, and taking down prey that will sustain their future families. But the bow alone is not enough. The true secret weapon of the Hadzabe is on the tip of their arrows. They use 3 different types of poison, each extracted from specific plants in the region. The most common is panjuko, produced from the sap of the desert rose, a succulent with pink flowers that grows in a few locations around Lake Eyasi. The Hadzabe regularly travel to an island on the southeast shore of the Salt Lake to collect this essential raw material. The extraction process requires precise knowledge. The archer cuts a branch from the plant, or crushes the pulp while it is still attached to the trunk. He uses the back of his axe as a pestle, repeating the movement until the milky juice flows in sufficient quantity. This liquid is then boiled in a pot until the water evaporates completely, leaving a sticky black substance. The resulting mass is shaped into small balls that can be transported and stored for months. When it is time to hunt, the archer lightly heats the ball of poison, cuts thin strips and wraps them just behind the metal tip of the arrow. The poison never touches the tip itself, as any contact with the meat before reaching the bloodstream would reduce its effectiveness. The science behind this technique is sophisticated. The desert rose contains cardiac glycosides, chemical compounds that interfere directly with the functioning of the heart. When the arrow penetrates the animal's skin and the poison enters the bloodstream, these compounds begin to deregulate the heartbeat. The animal first becomes lethargic, then staggering, then incapable of fleeing. Death occurs by heart failure, generally in less than 20 minutes for medium-sized prey. The Hadzabe also use shanjoko, extracted from a vine called Strophanthus eminei that grows in the hills of their region, and occasionally they acquire through trade with neighboring tribes kalikasi, produced from Acocanthera schimperi, a plant that does not exist in Hadzabe territory, but is cultivated by the Aki-Dorobos to the north. To mention this, a people without writing developed over millennia a complex pharmacological system involving 3 different plant species, each with specific methods of extraction, processing, and application. This knowledge is not in any manual. It exists only in the minds and hands of those who practice it daily. The hunt itself begins with tracking. The Hadzabe read the savannah like you read a book. Footprints in the sand indicate not only which animal passed by, but when it passed, in what direction it was going, if it was running or walking, if it was healthy or injured. Broken branches, overturned leaves, fresh feces, everything tells a story to those who know how to interpret it. They mainly hunt antelopes such as impalas, kudas, and dik-diks, as well as wild pigs, baboons, wild birds, and occasionally larger prey like zebras. The technique varies according to the target. For smaller animals, they use arrows without poison, relying on the precision of the shot for a quick kill. For larger prey, poison is essential. During the dry season, from May to October, hunting becomes more productive. The scarce vegetation concentrates the animals around the few remaining water sources. The Hadzabe know every well, every spring, every depression where water accumulates. They position themselves strategically and wait. Patience is as important as marksmanship, but here is the data that challenges all modern logic. How much time do you imagine a Hadzabe spends per day searching for food? 3 to 4 hours. Anthropological studies conducted over decades confirm this number repeatedly. While people in industrialized societies work 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours daily to secure basic resources, the Hadzabe resolve the issue of food in a single morning. The rest of the day is dedicated to resting, socializing, manufacturing tools, caring for children, or simply doing nothing. This efficiency does not mean constant abundance. There are days when the hunt fails. There are weeks when the rain does not come and the tubers dry up. But the diversity of available food sources ensures that an alternative always exists. If there is no meat, there are roots. If there are no roots, there are baobab fruits. If there are no fruits, there is honey. Honey occupies a special place in the Hadzabe diet and culture. When asked what their favorite food is, men and women answer unanimously, honey. This preference is not just a matter of taste. Honey provides up to 20% of the calories consumed by the Hadzabe, an extraordinary proportion for any human society. It is energy-dense, rich in micronutrients, and available during much of the year. But collecting wild honey is no simple task. The hives of the African bee Apis mellifera are often inside enormous baobabs, trees that can reach 15 meters in height, with trunks 8 to 9 meters in diameter. To reach these suspended treasures, the Hadzabe developed techniques that border on the acrobatic. The honey collector first needs to locate the hive, and here enters one of the most fascinating relationships between humans and wild animals on the entire planet. There is a bird called the greater honey guide, a discreet bird of neutral colors approximately the size of a thrush. This bird loves beeswax but cannot access the hives alone. The bees are too aggressive, the combs are too protected. So it developed, over millions of years of coevolution, a partnership with humans. When a greater honey guide finds a hive, it flies to where the Hadzabe are and begins to emit a characteristic call, different from any other sound it produces. The hunters immediately recognize this invitation. They respond with specific whistles and rhythmic taps on the tree trunks. The bird then flies toward the hive, stopping from time to check if the humans are following. This communication between species has been scientifically documented by researchers from Yale and other universities. It is not folklore. It is not an exaggeration. It is mutualism in action, an ecological agreement that has benefited both parties for millennia. Upon arriving at the indicated tree, the Hadzabe faces the challenge of climbing. Baobabs do not have low branches. Their trunks are smooth and immense. The solution is ingenious. The collector uses his axe to manufacture wooden stakes on the spot. He drives the first stake into the trunk using the back of the axe as a hammer. He climbs onto it. He drives the second one a bit higher. He climbs again. He repeats the process dozens of times until reaching the opening where the bees built their nest. 15 meters of vertical climbing on improvised stakes. Before putting his hand inside the hole full of furious bees, he needs to calm them. He descends to the ground, lights a fire, and prepares a torch made of dry bark, leaves, and plant resin. The dense smoke interferes with the bees' alarm pheromones, confusing their communication and reducing the aggressiveness of the swarm. The collector climbs again carrying the smoking torch, blows the smoke into the hive, and with his unprotected hand removes the golden combs full of honey, wax, pollen, and larvae. Everything is consumed. The liquid honey is the main prize. The wax is chewed and then spat out as a gift for the guide bird that led them there. The larvae provide extra protein. Nothing is wasted. The Hadzabe instinctively understand what modern science calls sustainability. They avoid collecting honey during the rainy season when the bees are rebuilding their colonies and storing reserves. They never destroy a hive completely, always leaving enough combs for the bees to recover. This unwritten agreement between humans and insects has sustained both for countless generations. While the men hunt and collect honey, Hadzabe women conduct another equally vital operation. Armed with digging sticks and bags woven from baobab fibers, they traverse the savanna in search of underground tubers, wild fruits, and seasonal berries. Tubers are the most reliable caloric base of the Hadzabe diet. Different species ripen at different times of the year, ensuring almost constant availability. The women know each plant by the shape of the leaves that sprout on the surface, even when the edible tuber is buried half a meter deep. They use their sticks to dig, extract the starchy roots, and roast them directly in the embers before consuming. The baobab fruit is another nutritional pillar. Inside the hard velvety shell, a white mealy pulp surrounds the seeds. This pulp contains vitamin C in concentrations higher than those of an orange. The Hadzabe consume it directly, or mix it with water to create a nutritious and refreshing drink. The seeds are cracked to extract an oil rich in essential fats. Berries of various species complement the diet during the wet season. Some are sweet, others acidic. All contribute vitamins and fibers that keep the digestive system functioning optimally. And it is precisely in this digestive system that scientists found something extraordinary. In 2014, researchers published a study in the journal Nature Communications that changed scientific understanding of human nutrition. They had collected stool samples from members of the Hadzabe community and compared the intestinal bacterial composition with samples from urban Italians and rural African farmers. The results were surprising. The Hadzabe microbiome showed levels of microbial diversity and richness significantly higher than any other group studied. Bacterial species that simply do not exist in the intestines of people in industrialized societies flourished abundantly in the Hadzabe. Other species that appear rarely in Western populations dominated the intestinal flora of these hunter-gatherers. Subsequent studies expanded these findings. In 2017, the same Stanford team documented something even more remarkable. The composition of the Hadzabe microbiome changes cyclically according to the seasons of the year. During the dry season, when they consume more meat, certain bacteria decrease to almost undetectable levels. During the wet season, when berries and honey predominate in the diet, these same bacteria return in full force. This seasonal cycle suggests that the original human microbiome was much more dynamic than the modern microbiome. The intestinal bacteria of our ancestors likely fluctuated in response to changes in food availability, constantly adapting to environmental conditions. In industrialized societies, where the diet remains relatively constant throughout the year thanks to refrigeration and global importation, this microbial flexibility has been lost, and along with it, apparently, some important protection against chronic diseases. The Hadzabe live practically free of diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, and dementia, not because they have access to sophisticated hospitals or modern medications. They have neither. They live this way because their bodies function differently, their intestines process food differently, their bacteria collaborate differently. A study conducted by Professor Hermann Ponce of Duke University revealed another fascinating paradox. Despite being physically much more active than sedentary people in industrialized countries, the Hadzabe do not burn significantly more calories. Total energy expenditure is surprisingly similar. The difference lies in how those calories are used. Hadzabe bodies are extraordinarily efficient, converting energy into movement without the metabolic waste that characterizes organisms adapted to a sedentary lifestyle. Research published in 2023 identified more than 120 bacterial species present in Hadzabe intestines that are disappearing or have already disappeared in industrialized populations. Scientists recovered 91,662 microbial genomes from 351 Hadzabe fecal samples. 44% of these genomes had never been catalogued in global databases. 8,400,000 protein families were identified just in the intestines of 167 Hadzabe individuals studied. More than half of these proteins were completely unknown to science. How is it possible that a group of 1,300 people carries in their intestines more biological diversity than populations of millions? The answer lies in the diet, and more deeply, in the lifestyle. The Hadzabe consume between 100 and 150 grams of fiber per day. The standard medical recommendation for adults in Western countries is 25 to 30 grams. Very few people even reach this minimum goal. The Hadzabe consume 5 times more. This fiber comes from tubers, baobab fruits, wild berries, and dozens of other plants that make up their varied diet. Each type of fiber feeds different bacterial populations. The more diversified the fiber consumed, the more diversified the resulting microbiome. But it is not just what the Hadzabe eat, it is also what they do not eat. No processed food, no refined sugar, no industrial vegetable oil, no preservatives, no dyes, no antibiotics. The Hadzabe diet consists entirely of foods that existed 40,000 years ago, prepared in ways that existed 40,000 years ago. Scientists have begun to call the Hadzabe microbiome a time capsule. It is possibly the clearest window we have to understand what human intestines were like before agriculture, before industrialization, before modern medicine. And what this window reveals is disturbing. We lost something important along the way. Experiments demonstrated that just 3 days following a diet inspired by the Hadzabe can increase intestinal bacterial diversity by up to 20%. Some of the lost species begin to reappear when people from industrialized societies consume more varied fibers and eliminate ultra-processed foods. But there is a problem. Many of these ancestral bacteria may be lost forever in urban populations. Without initial exposure during childhood, without contact with non-sterilized soil and plants, without transmission from mother to child through the maternal microbiome, certain species simply cannot establish themselves. Microbial extinction can be as irreversible as the extinction of animal species. That is why scientists from all over the world travel to Tanzania to study the Hadzabe. They collect samples of feces, saliva, blood, and skin. They sequence bacterial genomes. They catalogue species before they disappear, along with the way of life that sustains them. This scientific race raises complex ethical questions. Members of the Hadzabe community have expressed concern about what they call biopiracy. Researchers extract valuable biological resources from their bodies, publish studies in prestigious journals, build academic careers, and sometimes develop commercial products based on these discoveries. What returns to the Hadzabe? Shani Mangola, a Hadzabe community leader, stated publicly that some research projects collected samples without proper consent and tried to artificially manipulate the community's eating habits for experimental purposes. The line between legitimate scientific research and colonial exploitation is not always clear. What the Hadzabe really want are not academic publications or royalties from pharmaceutical patents. They want land. They want the right to continue living as they have always lived. In the last 50 years, the Hadzabe have lost 90% of their ancestral territory. What was once an area of approximately 4,000 square kilometers around Lake Eyasi has been progressively invaded by Datoga herders with their herds of goats and cattle, by Bantu farmers expanding their plantations, and by private hunting reserves catering to foreign tourists. Each external advance represents a loss for the Hadzabe. The herders' flocks compete for scarce water and frighten away the wild animals the hunters depend on. The plantations destroy the areas of native vegetation where tubers and berries grow. The hunting reserves prohibit the Hadzabe presence on lands that their families have occupied for millennia. In 2007, the Tanzanian government even leased 6,500 square kilometers of Hadzabe territory to the royal family of Abu Dhabi to use as a personal safari playground. Hadzabe who resisted were arrested. Only an international pressure campaign managed to reverse the agreement. 4 years later, in 2011, a community of 700 Hadzabe received collective property titles over 20,000 hectares of land. It was the first time in history that the Tanzanian government formally recognized the land rights of a tribal minority. A historic victory, undoubtedly, but 20,000 hectares represent only a fraction of what was lost. In 2024, another 30 square kilometers were returned to the Hadzabe Community Administration. Again, an important achievement. Again, insufficient to guarantee the long-term survival of the traditional way of life. The problem goes beyond the amount of land available. Quality also matters. Areas invaded by herders often become degraded by overgrazing. Native vegetation disappears. Wild animals migrate away. Water sources dry up or become contaminated. Even when the invaders are eventually removed, the land takes years to recover. Meanwhile, the pressure continues to increase. Today, of the approximately 1,000 Hadzabe living in the Lake Eyasi region, only 100 to 300 still hunt and gather most of their food. The others depend partially on occasional jobs on neighboring farms, on money obtained through tourism, or on food purchased or received as a donation. Many now attend school for a few years. They speak Swahili in addition to their native language, Hadzan. They wear donated Western clothes. Some carry cell phones. Anthropologist Colette Burbesque, who has studied the Hadzabe since 2007, noted with concern that they are not integrating into normal Tanzanian rural life. They are, in her words, transitioning to a life where they occupy the absolute bottom of the barrel. Alcohol has become a growing problem in some camps near urban areas. Deaths from alcohol poisoning, practically unknown a generation ago, now occur with disturbing frequency. Each death takes with it knowledge that cannot be recovered from any book. How to preserve a way of life that depends on hundreds of practical skills transmitted orally over decades. How to keep alive a language that exists only in the mouths of 1,300 people. How to protect an ancestral microbiome that can disappear in a single generation of dietary change. The Hadzabe have their own answer to these questions. They simply continue. They continue waking up before dawn. They continue lighting fire by friction. They continue manufacturing bows from mutateco wood. They continue preparing desert rose poison. They continue following the call of the guide bird. They continue climbing 15-meter baobabs. They continue sharing everything they get among everyone who needs it. Their social structure remains radically egalitarian. There are no chiefs. There are no formal hierarchies. Decisions are made by consensus. Resources are distributed equitably. When a hunter returns with prey, the meat is divided according to traditional rules that ensure everyone receives a portion, including widows, orphans, and the elderly incapable of hunting. James Woodburn, a British anthropologist who dedicated decades to the study of the Hadzabe, summarized it this way: the Hadzabe are concerned with equality. Differences in power, wealth, and status are systematically subverted, and this equality is, in a way, generalized by them to all of humanity. When pressed to explain why they refuse agriculture, animal husbandry, and other adaptations that would facilitate their material survival, the Hadzabe offer an answer that disarms any counter-argument. "We have no record of famine in our oral history," an elder told the organization Survival International. "The reason is that we depend on the natural products of the environment. Living this way, the environment we depend on is not damaged and remains healthy. It is not stubbornness, it is not ignorance. It is wisdom accumulated over 400 centuries. They know something that agricultural societies discovered too late, that radically modifying the environment to increase short-term production often leads to long-term collapse. That sustainable abundance requires limits, that taking only what is necessary ensures there will always be what is necessary to take." The Hadzabe have no word for work. It does not exist in the Hadzan language because it does not exist in their lives. What they do to survive is not separate from what they do to live. To hunt is to walk. To gather is to talk. To eat is to share. To sleep is to rest under stars that their ancestors already contemplated 400 centuries ago. Modern science discovered that 3 days following the Hadzabe diet can increase the bacterial diversity of your gut by 20%. That their microbiome contains species that completely disappeared from industrialized populations. That they live free of diabetes, obesity, and heart disease without ever having stepped into a hospital. Perhaps the question is not why the Hadzabe still live like this. Perhaps the real question is, why did we stop?